What do you know? I finally did it. Did what, you ask? I'm back with part 2 of my measurements video. Phew. My goodness, it has only taken me a little bit longer than forever, but your girl is finally here to deliver on part 2 of that measurements video. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll pop in part 1 right here. You probably should go ahead and watch that one first and then jump on back to this one so that you do not get confused. Anywho, since I kept you waiting long enough, let's get right into it. Now a quick recap. In part 1 of this series, I showed you guys how to go about taking your measurements. Once we had our measurements recorded, we then had a conversation about ease, and I pulled out a McCall's pattern, McCall's 7920, just to try and help you guys understand how you go about picking your starting pattern size. Now for today's video, we're going to be talking a little bit more about those length measurements that we took and how those measurements can inform some of the pattern adjustments that we might consider making. But I think I've kept you waiting long enough, so let's dive straight into it. Alright, so go grab your notebook with the measurements that you took. And let us now address our mind only to those length measurements. So for the length measurements that we recorded the underarm measurement to our waist point, our shoulder to our waistline to our hemline, and our shoulder to our apex. Now, if I'm not mistaken, most of the Big 5 patterns are drafted for a model that is about 5 foot 5 inches and has that length distributed proportionately. However, a lot of us do not fall into the average proportion type model scheme. For example, I am 5 foot 8.5 inches, but I carry so much length in my legs. And that means I am short waisted and I am quite petite between my shoulder line and my waistline. That inevitably means I have to make some length adjustments to my pattern pieces. You might also fall into this category where you are a little bit taller than average, but your proportions are not equal from your torso down to your legs. Now, there are some of you who are out there who are perhaps average size. There may be some of you who have longer torsos and shorter legs and that sort of thing. And that is why it is so important, you guys, for us to go ahead and make adjustments to our flat pattern. Despite any efforts put in by the pattern designers, it is impossible to address all body shapes and sizes and distributions of weights and length and that sort of thing. And so sewing out of the pattern envelope just doesn't work for me. And it probably in truth doesn't work for a lot of you. Maybe you haven't realized it until now, but making those length adjustments, in my view, are significant and can have great impacts on the overall fit of your finished garments. Now, the first thing I want to encourage you guys is to get the markings for your bust, your waist, and your hips in the right position lengthwise on your body. What do I mean? Alright, say like me, you have a 40.5 inch bust. The pattern may also be drafted for a 40.5 inch bust, but it is too high or too low based on your own bust point. The result is that you might find that it is too tight or too loose around the circumference of your body simply because it does not fall in the right place. The same thing goes for your waistline measurement. So you might have a 34-inch waistline as I do, but when you sew up your 12, for example, the waistline on the pattern is lower than your natural waist. The result is that the waistline is now sitting on your stomach, and so you might think that you need to increase the size widthwise of your waistline, when in fact, if it was sitting at your natural waist, it would have been just fine. Now, I really hope I'm not confusing you guys. So when we're talking about length measurements, we want to make sure that the bust, the waist, and the hips fall in line with your own bust, waist, and hips. Again, very, very rarely do patterns right out of the envelope fit your body and your proportions as they should. If you take the little bit of extra time to do some measurements, then you can at least make sure, even if you ignore any other pattern adjustments, at least make sure that your bust line, your waistline, and your hip line fall where they should. Now, on your pattern piece, there are often markings indicating where your bust, your waist, and your hips fall. At least that is the case with the big 5 patterns. Sometimes with the indie patterns, there are no markings to specify where your bust is, your waist, and your hip line is. But usually with your big 5 patterns, you will find demarcations for bust, waist, and hips. So let me just go back and grab my McCall's 7920 so we can walk through it together. All right, so this is my bodice front pattern piece. And if you look closely, there is a marking right here. It is a circle with like a cross on the inside. And this demarcates the bust point. So this is where the pattern designer contemplates the bust point will fall. Now, the bust point measurement is a measurement from your shoulder point down towards your bust and from your side seam in towards your bust. Those 2 measurements, the cross section thereof, will make up your bust point. Now, your bust point on your pattern may not match the bust point on your body. Now, when you trace off your pattern, or perhaps you can hold up your pattern piece, I am going to hold up the size 16. Is that the 16? No, that's not the 16. Let me see if I can fold it along the size 16. Now you can hold up your size towards your body like this and get a general idea of where the bust point will fall. Now bear in mind that there also needs to be seam allowance and that sort of thing. I haven't accounted for the seam allowance just yet. This is just going to give me a rough idea of where my bodice piece is going to fall. Now, the first thing that I notice is that when I feel at my side, this is where my natural waistline falls. You can see that there's a lot of tissue paper between where my thumb is, which is where my natural waist is, and where the end of my pattern piece is, which is about right here. So I'm going to go ahead and estimate that it's going to be about 1.5 inches or 2 inches too long. So if I were to sew up this bodice piece as it is, the likelihood is where my top joins my skirt at the waistline demarcation, it is going to fall below my natural waistline. So I know that I am going to need to shorten the length of my bodice piece. Now, in terms of the bust point, there is a dot in this pattern. Now, when I took my measurements, I know that the measurement between my apex to apex is 9 inches. That means that this point right here should fall 4.5 inches away from my center front so that it is in line with my apex point. How I know that is that I have simply divided the 9 inches, which is right across the body, into 2, which contemplates a split down my center front, and therefore my measurement is from center front over to the apex of my bust, which I know is 4.5 inches. So if when I go to measure my pattern piece, the measurement between this point right here, which is the bust marking, and my center front point is more or less than 4.5 inches, I know I need to move the position of my dart. Reason being, if the dart is not in the right place, it's not going to be pointing towards the apex of your bust. And it means that the ease that the dart releases at the dart point is not going to fall in the right spot. If it falls too far away from the apex of your bust, then you might feel straining across your bust and think that the width measurement that you took is too small, and then you'll be tempted to size up your pattern, when in fact you may not need to size up your pattern at all. You just need to go ahead and adjust your bust dart so that it falls in the right place. So too, the measurement that you took between your shoulder line and your apex is also very instructive. Now, if you've taken a measurement between your shoulder line and your apex point, and your measurement is either longer or shorter than the pattern measurement. When you get your ruler out, you measure from the seam allowance. You're going to have to draw in your seam allowance. In this case, it's 5/8 of an inch down to the apex. Now, depending on the measurement that you get, then you might need to go ahead and adjust the bust point. This is your bust point as a reminder. Now, once you have made the adjustment to your bust point, it might also mean that you need to go ahead and either lengthen or lower your bust dart. So we took another measurement for that, and that was from your shoulder point over the apex down to your waistline. Again, you're going to use those measurements to determine how long or short your dart should be. Now, when you take the measurement from your shoulder line to your bust point, if it is longer than the measurement that you get when you measure your flat pattern piece, you're going to want to go and lengthen your bodice piece above the bust point. I'm going to repeat. If the measurement that you get between your shoulder point and the bust point is longer than when you measure the pattern piece itself, then you want to go ahead and lengthen your pattern piece above your bust point. Too often, we want to go ahead and add the length to the wrong place. You guys, I cannot stress it enough. You want your bust point, your waist point, and your hip point to fall on your natural body. Not only on what the pattern designer intends, you want it to fall in line with your own measurements. And so when you're lengthening or shortening your pattern pieces, you want to make sure you're lengthening or shortening them at the right spots. So again, if your measurement between your shoulder point and your apex or your bust point is longer than when you measure your flat pattern piece. For example, let's say we measured between our shoulder point and our bust point and it was 14 inches. When we measure between the shoulder point and the apex point on our pattern pieces minus any seam allowances, let's say we get 13 inches. That would mean we would need to lengthen our pattern pieces by an inch above the bust point. Now, the converse is also true. If it is that our measurement is 14 inches, our body measurement is 14 inches, but the measurement on the pattern piece is 15 inches, then we're going to need to go and shorten our pattern pieces by an inch above the bust point. It doesn't make any sense to just tack on the length at the bottom because that will not have any effect on our bust point. So we want to go ahead and make those adjustments above the bust point. Now, when we measure the measurement between our apex point and our waistline, we can use that to determine if we need to make lengthening or shortening adjustments below our bust point but above our waist point. So for example, if when we measure from our apex to our waistline, the measurement we get is 5 inches, but then on the pattern piece, when you measure from your apex to your waistline, you get 6 inches, then you know you need to go ahead and shorten your pattern piece by an inch. The converse is true. If when you measure, you get 5 inches on your pattern piece, but on your own body, the distance is 6 inches, then you know you want to go and lengthen your pattern piece between the bust point and the waist point this time by an inch. We want our length to be in the right place. Now also, when we do our measurement from our apex point to our waistline, that will also help us determine our dart length. Now I think your darts are backed off from your apex depending on your bust size. If I'm not mistaken, we want to back off at least 2 inches for a C cup, and I think it goes up by ½ an inch for each cup thereafter. So I think if you have a D cup, you want to back off your darts 2½ inches and so on and so forth, just so that there is enough room to release the excess from your dart so that it can cover your boob area. goodness gracious me. It's making sense in my head, but I'm not sure if I'm doing a great job of explaining it. Please, please, please leave me some comments down below and let me know whether you guys are following along quite nicely with what I'm trying to explain to you. If not, then I'm going to have to think of a way that I can better communicate the information to you so that you can find it useful for your own sewing and for your own pattern adjustments. I really, really am trying my best, you guys, but I don't know. I'm saying it, I'm thinking it, but I'm still feeling, oh my goodness, am I confusing everybody out there? Gosh. Anyways, back to our pattern pieces. So those are the kinds of things you want to bear in mind for your pattern piece. So this is my original pattern piece, and I'm just going to pull my adjusted pattern piece to show you what that one looks like. So this is what my pattern piece looks like. You notice that there are lots of scrap pieces of paper behind my pattern piece, and that is an indication of just how many adjustments I ended up making to my pattern piece. So you might notice, first of all, at the top of my bodice piece, there is a shortening of my pattern piece, and you can tell that because you can see the overlap. So I have shortened the upper part of my bodice piece by 1/2 inch on my front bodice piece only. And that is because I am petite, but I am shorter in my front between my shoulder and my waist than I am in my back. And that is probably as a result of my poor posture. So I've gone ahead and I have shortened my pattern piece by 1/2 inch, but I just split it up into 2 areas. One here and one here because this is a V-neck. I want to maintain the integrity of the shape of the pattern as much as possible. And so if you shorten or lengthen your pieces significantly, it might be a little bit more difficult for you to true up or blend your seams. And so I have just split mine up into 2 different areas. One here, one here. So I have shortened the distance between my shoulder point and the apex point by 1/2 inch on my pattern piece to reflect my own body measurements. That means if I had sewn up the pattern piece as it was, it means that I would have gotten some excess fabric above my boobs, and that would have resulted in like some loose fabric or some tiny folds of fabric above my bust point. Now, it doesn't matter how much you pull your shirt down. The fact of the matter is there just would have been too much length between the bust and the shoulder that you just cannot get rid of. Maybe once you have sewn up your piece, you would have gone back in and tried to take it up at your shoulder point. I do not recommend that. If possible, you should go ahead and adjust your flat pattern piece first, which I have by reducing mine by 1/2 inch. Now, on my particular pattern piece, I also did a full bust adjustment. I'm not going to get too much into full bust adjustment in this video because I think that full bust adjustments need a different video, a video of its own. I do have some videos here on the channel about full bust adjustments. I do know that I need to probably go and re-record some of those tutorials because it was a little bit difficult for some of you to see the line drawings that I put in. But if you follow along, I have walked you through it step by step. And if you look closely and you listen carefully to what I'm saying, you should be able to grasp what you need to do for your full bust adjustment. But I do have it on my list of videos to re-record. Now, so I have done a full bust adjustment on this pattern piece. You can see that there's excess width added into my pattern piece. But again, I'm not going to confuse you too much with that. Now, I also went ahead and shortened my pattern piece below my bust point, and this is where I have shortened it right here. And that has been shortened by 1/2 inch. So I have reduced the distance between my apex and my waistline by 1/2 inch. That has the effect of moving my waistline upwards. So instead of the seam falling below my natural waistline, I can be sure that once I sew this up to my skirt, that my waistline is going to hit me right at the narrowest part of my hip. Now, if your waistline measurement is longer, say you have a longer torso, then instead of overlapping your pieces right here, you will cut them and spread them apart and add in as much length as you need, whether it be 1 inch, 2 inches, or what have you. Now, I don't suggest adding your length at the hemline right here because you want to maintain the pattern's original shape. And so it's always better for you to go ahead and cut a line across the pattern pieces away from the hemline, and then you can lengthen and shorten as necessary. All right, those were the adjustments on my front bodice. Let's now go ahead and talk a little bit about the back bodice. So the first thing is, because I have shortened my waistline on my front bodice piece by a half inch, I automatically know that I need to go back and shorten the waistline on my back bodice piece by half an inch. Where am I going to shorten the pattern piece? Now, just as with the front piece, because we have shortened the waistline beneath the bust apex and up from our waistline, we want to shorten the back bodice piece in the same general area. So you're going to shorten it to more towards the hemline and not towards the upper back of your back bodice piece. So let me grab my piece so that I can show you. So this is my back bodice piece, and you can notice that the paper overlaps right here, and that is because I went ahead and shortened the back bodice piece by a half inch in the same general area, so below my armhole section right here. Now you may notice that there's also another sliver of paper a little further down, and that is because I did what's called a sway back adjustment. Now, to determine whether you need a sway back adjustment, I have determined it because I have just made up so many pieces of clothing that ended up having an excess in fabric pooling right at the base of my waistline right here. However, I think I mentioned in my first video that a lot of the pattern envelopes have a measurement from your back neck down to your waistline. And I said that it wasn't that important. And the reason I said that it wasn't that important is because I already know that in most cases I need to do a 1/4 inch sway back adjustment, but I figured that out based on sewing up numerous toiles. If you don't know, however, you might find that particular measurement useful, and so I probably need to bite my tongue just a little bit because of what I had said previously. Now, if you take the measurement between your back neckline and your waist neckline and you measure your pattern piece, and you find that your pattern piece is either longer or shorter between your back neckline and your waistline piece, then you might need to go and do a sway back adjustment, which is a shortening of the distance between your back neck and your waistline, as in this case, or you might need to go ahead and add some additional length. Now, truth be told, I don't know what the opposite of a sway back adjustment is. In fact, I've never heard of anybody having to do the opposite, but you just might be one of those persons. But if you do the measurement and it is longer from your back to your waistline than it is on your pattern piece, then you might need to do the opposite. However, you want to shorten or lengthen your waistline piece first. That is between the armhole and your waistline. You want to make sure that you shorten or lengthen your waistline pieces via first. And once you have done that, then you can do your sway back adjustment. And the reason is, for your sway back adjustment, it has the effect of removing some length at your center back, but it tapers out to nothing at your waistline. So it's not just a slash and spread of your piece and then overlapping. It is a pivoting of your center back piece so that it becomes shorter at your center back, and you grade it out to nothing at your side seam. Now, I do have a tutorial here on the channel all about the sway back adjustment, and you might, if you think you need this adjustment, want to run on over to that video so that you can gather some more information about what the sway back adjustment is and how you go about performing your own sway back adjustment. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention on the back bodice piece is that you may notice that I did not shorten my back bodice piece through the arm side, as it were, or my upper back, as I did with my front pattern piece. Again, the reason is I am petite at the upper portion of my body, but I know from past experience that I am shorter from my front measurements than I am in the back, and that is because my shoulders now rotate forward because of poor posture. And so if I were to go ahead and remove the same half an inch from my back bodice piece, then it would mean that my shoulder line would end up sitting too far back from my natural shoulder point, because reducing the length in my center front, pinching it out, means that I'm also moving the shoulder point where these two seams will join towards my center front, in this case by 1/2 inch. And that will mean it will sit flushly on my shoulder point. You guys, some of these things are by trial and error, or I have determined them by trial and error. If I had known all of this information when I started sewing, I would have been paying a lot more attention to my flat pattern pieces. But alas, I think that all of that experience has just taught me so much wisdom when it comes to making my flat pattern adjustments. Now, because of that, I don't often make toiles anymore. Very rarely do I sew up a toile, whereas in my early days of sewing, I toiled everything. The simplest of blouses, even those that had just shoulder seams and side seams, your girl was toiling them. And doing all of those toiles have helped me to learn so much more about my body and how my length and how my weight is distributed. Now, I'm trying to save you guys a little bit of time, helping you to skip over that step of having to toile everything by paying more attention and focusing on your flat pattern pieces. Now, I do a lot of flat pattern piece measurements before I cut out my projects, and I make a couple of standard adjustments based on what I feel I need based on previous experiences. And then I usually feel fairly confident with sewing up a final garment. I still don't always get it right. Sometimes I've sewn up a garment and I think, I could have benefited from doing this adjustment or that adjustment. But overall, the starting point of my projects now is much better than it was when I started sewing. And that is, again, because I have been teaching myself step by step how to make adjustments to my pattern pieces to reflect my own body size and shape. And I would definitely encourage you to start that journey if you have not yet. You will surprise yourself how much making one single adjustment to your flat pattern piece can translate to the finished look of your garment. All right, so we've talked about the length measurements for our bodies. So let me just grab the skirt pieces so that we can also have a discussion about the length measurements on your skirt pieces. All right, so I've grabbed my skirt piece, and this is what my skirt piece looks like. Now, in terms of the length measurements, I did not have to make any adjustment to my skirt piece between my waistline and my hip line, because when I measured it from my waistline to my hip line and I did the same measurements on the tissue paper, I was satisfied that the difference was so minuscule that I did not need to make any adjustments. Now, if you have a longer torso, for example, it might mean that your hips sit lower than on the pattern. Now, you will notice, particularly with a pencil skirt, there's a little curvature at the side seam, and the bulk of the curve will hit at your hip. If you do not adjust your pattern piece for your hip measurement, for your hip line, it means that the curve will not sit in the right place on your body. Perhaps your curve needs to either be longer or shorter so that it reflects the curvature of your body between the waistline and the hip line. I did, however, make what I have called a hollow hip adjustment. In my mind, I feel like I came across the term somewhere early on in my sewing days. I have not been able to find it anywhere. I don't know if it was a book that I read or something. I don't even know if that is a name that I saw, or maybe I have just told it to myself that often that it has become, in my mind, the right terminology. But the point is, on my body, I have a sort of dip in the curvature between my waistline and my hip line. That means I'm not very hippie, you guys. I have more of a rectangular body shape. I didn't like it at first, but I've come to terms with it. It is what God has given me, so I may as well make the best of it. But I do have a dip along my side seam between my waistline and my hip line. Now, you guys, when you have is this a concave curve or a convex curve? I feel like this is a concave curve. Like when you have a concave curve, the distance between the waistline and the hip line is going to be longer the more it curves out. When you have a convex curve, it means that the distance between here and the waist and the hip line is going to be shorter. In my case, because I have a dip at my side seam, it is a little bit shorter right along my side seam. And so I've gone ahead and I have removed a 1/4 inch from my skirt from the side seam up towards the upper portion of my skirt and tapered it to nothing at the center front. Remember that I said generally the difference between my waistline and my hip line in terms of the circumference measurements was fine. And so I did not have to lengthen or shorten the entirety of my skirt piece. However, I did have to remove a 1/4 inch in length along my side seam, and that has the effect of shortening only the side seam of my skirt and leaving the front portion of my skirt at the pattern's original length. Now, when I do not do this adjustment, the result is that my skirt sort of caves in towards my center front. When it gets down to like the knee area, I notice that my skirt sort of swings in and my side seams swing towards my front right at my hem line. Now, if when you make your skirts, you have noticed that they sort of cave in towards your hemline, then you might want to consider doing this adjustment. It's going to take you all of 5 minutes to do the adjustment on your paper pattern, but the effect it has on your finished skirt is just impeccable. It really, really is. Now, I know sewing, most of us just want to get sewing. We're so eager to get started on a project. We just want to cut up our good fabric and start sewing. I am like that in many cases, and that is why you have heard me say time and time again that I have not finished cutting out all of my pattern pieces before I start sewing. Has that turned around and bit me in the ass more than once? Yes. Yes, it has. Because I often find out that I don't have enough fabric to do what I had in mind, and so I either have to pivot and sort of adjust what I want the finished garment to look like, or I might need to source more fabric, or it might mean using a different fabric as a contrast, or for my facing, my lining, whatever. But I don't make the same mistake. I don't play the same game when it comes to my fit adjustments. You guys, just take the little bit of extra time to make some flat pattern adjustments and you will love your finished garments so much more. Like, what is the point of whizzing through sewing up the good fabric only to try on your project and be like, ugh, I hate it because it just doesn't fit well. Save yourself that trouble and save yourself that fabric by taking some time to do your fit adjustments. Now, for that adjustment with my hip line, the adjustment that I did on the front skirt piece is the same adjustment that I need to do on the back skirt piece. Usually with your length adjustments, whatever you do to the front, you want to do to the back, save and except for if you need to rotate your pieces forward. Now, you could always adjust the length at the back and the front as necessary, and then go back in and do what's called a forward shoulder adjustment, which is also a different adjustment. And it might help you if you separate your adjustments like that so that you can learn how you make your length adjustments, what you do to the front, you do to the back. In exceptional circumstances, you might only need to do an adjustment to the front or to the back, as in the case with the sway back adjustment. But over time, I think it will become like second nature to you if you do it long enough, and you can start to then take shortcuts. In my case, I often take shortcuts because I already know what I need to accomplish in terms of my adjustments, but it was not always that way. So take your time and work your way up. And you still might want to do a toile after you make your flat pattern adjustments, just to make sure that you have done the right adjustments and that you have the right calculations. You might find once you do your toile, you can tweak your pattern just a little bit more based on your toile. Obviously, fabric will perform differently to paper, but measuring your flat pattern pieces is a great starting point. Now, with the skirt, I should also mention that when I'm doing flared out skirts, like when I'm doing like circle skirts or gathered skirts, usually I don't bother to do that hip adjustment just because there's so much volume anyway. It sort of doesn't matter, but the need for this adjustment, in my view, is a lot more obvious in a pencil skirt or even an A-line skirt. You don't want the hem of your skirt caving inward. All right, you guys. So I've spoken to you quite a bit today about the length adjustments. If there's one thing that you must take from this video is to make sure that your bust point, your waistline, and your hip point on your pattern piece reflects the bust point, waist point, and hip point on your own body. Once you have your length adjustments down packed, then you can move on to your width adjustments. But again, that is information for an entirely different video. I don't want it to end up being too confusing by offloading too much information on you at once. And so I think I'm going to end the video here for today and come back sometime soon. Hopefully the wait will not be as long as it was for this video to talk a little bit more about width adjustments. Now, we did talk in depth about width measurements in terms of picking out patterns, but there are one or two width adjustments that you might need to make to your pattern once you have your length adjustments in place. So again, I'll come back sometime soon to talk to you guys about that. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up, drop me some comments down below, let me know what you thought of this video. If you have any questions on your length measurements and how you use those length measurements to determine your flat pattern adjustments, then drop them in the comment section down below and I will do my very best as always to answer. Now, if you have gotten this far in this video and you're not yet a subscriber, then I don't even know what you're doing, because obviously you need to go ahead and subscribe. If you have managed to sit through and listen to me attempt to teach you about pattern adjustments and you're not even subscribed here, do us all a favor and hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell on so you never miss any of my upcoming videos. Obviously, you like it here. So until next time, you guys, stay calm, stay cool, stay safe, and absolutely get to your flat pattern adjustments. Peace.